Well, hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are tuning in from in the world. My name is Adrian Reed, and a very warm welcome to this BA community webinar. And I mention different time zones, and I know from looking at the delegate list that we've got people from just about everywhere in the world, from as far as I can see. Do feel free to chat to other people. If you're attending live, chat to other people in the chat tool down at the bottom. Say where you're from. It'll be interesting to see who's actually attending live. And this webinar is probably the most, or certainly amongst the most, like it's created so much interest in terms of registration. So it is clearly a hot topic. We're going to be talking today about untangling the mess, product ownership, product management, and business analysis. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Kevin Brennan. Now, many of you, I'm sure, will know Kevin. Kevin was instrumental in the creation of the business analysis body of knowledge, the BA-BOK guide, right up until version 3, has held just about every possible position that there is possible at IIBA, international speaker, author, and currently a chief business architect, and lots more besides. So Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Adrian. It's always a pleasure to see you and to have a chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And just before we do get started, a couple of things just to mention for those of you that are attending live. The first is, as well as chatting in the chat box, you can also ask questions. So as Kevin and I are talking, do feel free to ask questions. You can ask them anonymously if you don't want your name read out, and we'll definitely respect that privacy if you hit the anonymous question button. Also, you can participate in a different way. So I'm going to put in the chat window now a link. So hold fire for the link, and that is a link to a mural board. And I'm just going to show you what that looks like now. So if I share my screen, you will see a mural board here. You don't have to sign in or anything like that. As you can see, I am visiting sea lion on the mural board. I can see some of you on there already. I think we've got visiting sheep and so on. And the idea is, if you've not used mural before, you can take notes, right? But like there's hundreds of us online already. Why don't we take collective notes? So all you need to do is like double click, add your ideas and takeaways, and what I'll do is I will create a PDF of this after and share on social media. So, you know, power of the crowd, and I can see you all playing around on there already. There's also links off on the side, so if you like what Kevin's saying, as I'm sure you are, you can connect with him on LinkedIn, you can connect with me, and there's other stuff down there as well. So do feel free to add your thoughts as we go along as well, and remember to ask questions in the Q&A panel and chat to fellow delegates in the chat panel. So, Kevin, quite a lot for us to talk about. I thought one of the areas that it'd be worth starting with is around product, because I don't know about you, but I find there's quite a lot of confusion about product ownership, product management. But I want to start from a different angle and say, what does product mean in this context? And are there different definitions that lead to confusion?
Well, thanks for setting that up, Adrian. And yeah, I think the fundamental issue stems from the fact that product has multiple meanings. And, you know, like a lot of English words, there are a bunch of different ones, but the two key ones that come into play here are a product can be, you know, something that you're selling in a marketplace, right? When we talk about an organization's products and services, it's what you are providing to your customers. Product can also mean the output of a project or a process, right? So my work products or the product of this effort was. And the thing is that product management and product ownership actually stem from those two different meanings. A product manager is a person who's responsible for, you know, bringing a product to market, modifying that product, keeping it up to date, changing characteristics or how you do it, whatever you need to do in order to generate sales for that thing, right? Whereas a product owner is in Scrum, the person who is fundamentally responsible for determining what the output of the team that is doing the development ought to be. And there are a lot of caveats to exactly what that is. But that is that is the difference between the two. Now, obviously, you can see with a product owner, there's a relationship. If you have a product manager, right, that they may be done by the same person, but they come from two distinct ideas about what product means.
Yeah, really interesting as you're talking there, Kevin, because I was also thinking there's also a sort of conflation, or I see a conflation sometimes with product also sort of meaning internal deliverable or artifact, which is almost like another potential meaning for the word, right? It's like, it's not even, it could be a document or something like that. So I guess that sort of starts to play into the mix as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You can have those kind of products are different from what a product manager is producing at a fundamental level, right? They can be part of it, but they're not the same at all.
Yeah, they're a stepping stone that might enable some change to a product that a product manager is worried about, but it's the same word with a very different meaning, and you could just imagine people using the same word with very different connotations. So thinking sort of along those lines, we've mentioned two terms there already: product owner and product manager. And I wonder, what's your take on the difference between those two roles?
Well, as I said, a product manager is the person who's responsible for defining what products go to market. So if you're doing product management, you're actually going out there, you're doing various kinds of customer research, right? So you might be doing surveys, you might be doing interviews, focus groups, you could be doing observations, but whatever it is, you may be working with customers directly or through marketing or whatever, but you're taking that customer feedback, right? You're taking the performance of the product in the market. So what's the adoption rate? How much profit are you making it? All of that. And you're looking at what you offer and figuring out how to change it in order to drive an increase in adoption. You're basically trying to help build something that people in the market want to pay for. Or, if you're in a government or nonprofit, you might not be measuring your success by money, but you'll have some other kind of metric that you're looking at, right? In terms of, okay, what's, a hospital would be worried about patient wait times or people coming back after injury. These kinds of metrics that you might look at to determine if your product is doing well and figuring out what features or capability it needs to do even better. A product owner is somebody who is a role on a Scrum team originally, and it's been more broadly adopted in Agile, but fundamentally, the idea behind Scrum is that you have your development team, and they are building the product, the work output, right? And they are responsible for determining, how the process by which it gets built, the speed at which they can work, right? A lot of those kind of things. So they will actually be responsible for building it. But to make that team able to work as a autonomous unit, which is one of the things that Scrum looks for, there are two roles that Scrum defines to interact with the rest of the world. One is the Scrum Master, right? And so the Scrum Master's job primarily is to, help the team improve its internal processes. So call out problems or impediments and coach them towards finding a solution for that so they can work more effectively, and protecting the team from interference from the outside of the organization. So, if you have various managers who are all pulling the team in one direction or another, the Scrum Master may need to step in and say, no, actually, the team is going to determine how they work. They're going to determine the pace at which they work. And, if you have a issue with that, come and talk to me, and I will work with the team to get that right. It's basically a way of ensuring that the Scrum process is respected by the team and the organization. The product owner is the single point of authority for what the team needs to work on. And I say single point of authority because there's nothing that prevents the team from going out and talking to any stakeholder. That's not something that Scrum discourages or says is wrong. But if they want to determine what they need to work on, what their priorities are, that has to come from the product owner or be signed off or approved by the product owner. And no work should go into the team that hasn't come past the product owner, right? So the product owner's job is to prioritize all of the incoming work, the requests, the user stories, however it's built, and tell the team what is the highest priority for them to work on at any given time. The team will then take that, you may need to break it down further, and then you take it into a sprint with a goal, and you try to accomplish that goal or not. You have the whole feedback processes, but that fundamentally is what a product owner does. Now, Scrum doesn't say a word about how that backlog is created, right? And that's where the link between to product management or business analysis, I think, exists.
Yeah, and this is really interesting, Kevin. And I've got so many cogs turning as well as always when we talk, as you're talking there. So I want to test an analogy just to see if this makes sense. So because you mentioned that the product manager, it would be some sort of product that's being exposed to the outside world and figuring out what capabilities need to be there. And that could be in a for-profit organization, or it could be in something like a hospital, right? So maybe let's imagine there's a product manager who's involved in the the ICU, the sort of urgent care department in a hospital. Is it fair to say then you could have a product manager who is looking at, say, the patient record keeping and the electronic patient record system and processes, and that's how those two sort of cascade down. The product manager, it might be looking at that bigger area, and the product owner is looking at, say, patient record keeping, medical imaging, that kind of thing. Or am I off on a complete tangent?
Well, I guess it would. What would happen is you could have a number of different ways depending on the nature of the organization, right? So one possibility is that you have a product owner for a team, and then there are multiple product managers who are looking at different parts of the market and feeding all of those into the product owner. But if you have them working on the same thing, right? What you would have is that the way it would probably work is that the product manager would be outwardly focused. He would be going out into the ICU or talking to the nurses, or she, right? Figuring out what features they need to build. And in most cases, because product management involves a market, right? If you're doing product management, you're looking at ICUs across the country, multiple ICUs, to figure out how to build something that they can all use. That then would get, as that comes down and gets defined and detailed, it turns into something the team can work on. And that's when it needs to feed into somebody taking on the product owner role to prioritize, to balance against other things like technical debt or so forth that the team is working with, and determine what is the priority order for each of the things that are coming in. Yeah. And how they do that is something that Scrum doesn't even talk about, right? So you could be doing workshops with multiple stakeholders. You could be, taking directions from one person. Doesn't matter. Doesn't talk about how it's done. But the point is that the team can always go to the product owner and ask, what is supposed to happen next? What are we supposed to work on? And conversely, how do we know that this thing is done, right? How do we say that we've completed the sprint goal and that this thing does what we agreed to at the start?
Absolutely, that whole knowing when it's done, knowing when it's suitable. So we've got lots of questions coming in, and please do keep the questions coming in. We'll answer as many as we can. I'm going to combine a couple of questions because they're very, very similar. So Andy asks, have you witnessed a hybrid of the roles, so product manager and product owner? It seems like they could be blended, and would like to hear any thoughts on that. And Elizaveta asks, could a product owner be a product manager at the same time? So similar questions there about overlapping roles. What are your thoughts on that, Kevin?
So first of all, I would say, yeah, a product owner could be a business analyst or a product manager or some other role at the same time, if you have the ability to do all of the work that both roles require, which is the big if sometimes, but there's no conflict between either of those things and being a product owner in principle. In fact, BA Bach version 3, we actually went and mapped all of the tasks against the responsibilities of a product owner, and a BA can do and will do all the things that a product owner is supposed to do. but right, a product manager could do the same for a software product, but there's no inherent conflict. On the Scrum Master versus product and product owner combination, I find that is generally considered to not be the greatest idea. And the problem is that they kind of have somewhat conflicting motivations, right? Just like merging a project manager and a business analyst has, right? The product owner is trying to, get as much done for the market as possible at any one time. The Scrum Master is trying to preserve the integrity of the Scrum process. And there will be times when those two things come into conflict, and having them done by one person makes that conflict harder to articulate and resolve.
Yeah, I've heard that tension before described as healthy tension. I kind of like that. You need that. You need the sort of both skill sets. Nuno makes a comment or asks a question and suggests that product manager is more market oriented, while the product owner is more sort of internally and restricted to the team. Would you agree with Nuno on that one, Kevin?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, with the understanding that the product owner role is primarily a team role in Scrum or other Agile methods, right? It is a role somebody plays on the team, and that role can be filled by somebody who has other additional responsibilities. I think in most cases it usually is.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, fantastic. Great. So I want to just cover another couple of questions before we move on. So Almudina asks, what do you think of the definitions of product manager and product owner in SAFe, so the Scaled Agile Framework?
I have to admit, I haven't seen what they are in SAFe, so I can't directly comment on that. Somebody can tell me, if somebody can say what they are, I might be able to.
I'm absolutely certain that Almudina is an expert in SAFe. She's very, very knowledgeable about such things. So hey, if you're still there, pop them in the chat if you have them, and we'll try and catch them later on. And then there's quite a few people asking. And apologies if I mispronounce any names. Paramita is asking, where does a BA fit in the PO and the project manager world? And we have an anonymous question: how does one move from BA to PO or PO to PM? So there are quite a few questions about how BA relates to this and whether there's some sort of career implication or pathway there. What's your take on that, Kevin?
Well, okay, so if you're a business analyst, the reality is that you could be a product owner or you could be supporting a product owner. I've been a BA who supported a product owner. In that particular instance, we had the BAs fleshing out detailed requirements, and the person who took on the product owner role was fundamentally somebody who was an executive in the organization, right? So they didn't have the time to engage with the team every day, but they would come in for the key, prioritization moments and determine what they wanted the team to develop next, right? So they would take on that part of the role. The product owner doesn't necessarily develop all the user stories, right? They decide which ones are the priority. They may write them, they may not write them. That's not something that the product owner concept determines. It's really a function within the team. In terms of how you go from one to the other, I think the question would be how you'd have to look at how things work in your particular organization, because everybody has their own definitions of what these mean, right? So in some places, product owners might report to product managers. In others, you sometimes see a BA reporting to a product owner. Yeah. Typically, I would say that a product owner is going to be somebody who has a couple of skill sets which some BAs may not have. You're going to have to be able to be comfortable going in and talking with senior executives and managing, pushback and the relationships between them in most cases, I suspect. Or, unless you're on a really big product where you have multiple product owners and the product manager takes on that responsibility. And you have to get fairly ruthless about prioritization, right? A lot of BAs, we like to feel our job is, we capture all the stakeholder requirements, we bring them in, and then there's a discussion about which ones actually get done. As a product owner, you've got to be comfortable with saying, you know what, this is the most important, this is the most valuable thing we can work on right now. And so I want team to be working on that. And as just mentioned earlier, in some cases that may be internal stuff, like the team needs to take time to set up a new environment or deal with some technical debt or implement changes that will help them work more effectively in the future. The product owner should be aware of that and be prepared to give the team a certain amount of time to deal with those kind of internal issues.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And just to weave in a question from Michelle here, Michelle says, you mentioned that BAs can fulfill the role of product owner, but would they or should they have the authority to make business decisions? And shouldn't those decisions be made by a business owner? Which I suppose links to your point there, Kevin, about the being willing to prioritize, but also having the authority to make the call. I guess there's a tension there as well.
Yeah, but so that's the fundamental difference, right? So as a business analyst, you ultimately end up with all of the stuff that a product owner does, right? Even before I got engaged with IIBA back in 2007, I was doing a ton of prioritization and, pushing that back to the project manager or the business owner or whoever. And, I didn't have the formal authority, but I certainly had opinions and recommendations, and I could certainly talk to the value those have. I think if you want to move into that role, that's where to start, right? At least come to the executive or the product owner with your recommendations and what you think is the first priority. And as you get experience managing that, you're more likely to move up to a product owner role. Now, to get to be a good product manager means a big shift in mindset. BAs are typically inward focused, right? And that is true at all sorts of levels. I mean, I'm, at Aligned Outcomes, I'm the chief business architect, right? But I'm still focused on the same kind of issues, which are about internal change and internal processes, right? And how technology is used. A product manager has to be market focused. So, the organization does whatever it does, but my job as a product manager is to figure out what will make this thing successful in the marketplace by whatever metrics we have chosen to use, right? And I do think that the word market is critical to understanding what makes product management. I don't think you have product management for internal products because they're not competing against something. A product manager has to be in competition with other things. Now, you may be working for a nonprofit, right? You may not determine the success of your product by financial goals, but there are still other solutions in the market which people can accept, and you are trying to make your product better at solving the problems of your customers or your clients than the alternatives.
Yeah. Really interesting. And again, as you were speaking there, Kevin, I was thinking about how, we've probably all been on projects where there's been such a focus on, on time, on budget, but like there's that realization, but there's no point because it's taking us in the wrong strategic direction. It's out of date. And as you were talking there, I was starting to think about like we'll take a break we'll answer some more questions in a moment. There are loads coming in, which is great. We will answer as many as we can. But I was thinking about like an overlap with strategic business analysis or strategy analysis. And so, for example, looking at the external market and, classic techniques would include things like PESTLE or Steeple or Five Forces or whatever, like looking externally and thinking about the opportunities and threats, right? And I know we've talked about this before, but I often think about like the Titanic and the iceberg, right? See what the organization's iceberg is part of this about like, and even as a BA, even as well as being whether PM or BA, about saying, I think there's an iceberg over there and we need to steer away from it.
Yeah, and that comes from I think honestly you can see that at any level, right? I mean, I've been I've had times where I've been a BA at a small company, and I've heard the senior executives talk about what their strategy is, and I've had the moment of like, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
So, but to get to the point of your question, Adrian, I mean, you talked about strategic business analysis. I'm going to assume, for the sake of argument, that is very similar to what being a business architect. I suspect it is. I think, although business architect is not that well-defined a role in practice, but absolutely, when you're working on the internals of a company, you're also looking at what is going on in the world around you, right? Because that is going to drive your strategy. The difference is that if you're taking it from an architectural point of view, you're saying, okay, we know what the environment is, right? And based on that, the executives have set an overall strategy in terms of how we're going to position ourselves, what kind of products we're going to come out with, and so on. As a strategic business analyst or business architect, you would look at that and say, okay, well, what are the capabilities that we need that we don't have today, right? How is that going to change our processes, our internal technology, and kind of build that out into a roadmap that says, okay, here are the changes that we need to make to the organization in order to get to where we want to be. A product manager and a product management organization would look at that strategy and say, okay, if we want to accomplish that strategy, here's the offerings that we need to have in the market. Here are the programs that we should be running, right? Here are the products that we should be selling. Here are the capability. Here's what we're actually going to do, and here's how our customers are going to see things change in order to realize those goals.
Yeah.
So but in both things, I think the higher you get up in the organization, the more those things kind of overlap, right?
Yeah, because as you were talking there, and again, I mean, I see everything through an analysis lens because I guess I'm just wired that way, and I was thinking about that as like that those seem like similar but different flavors of gap analysis and a capability gap analysis, but also a gap analysis in terms of value proposition or service proposition. And the two are inextricably linked, right? Because, well, how do you deliver services or products? Well, you leverage the capabilities of the organization that are packaged in a particular way to develop something to give it to the customer. So this is really, really, really interesting. So just before we move on to more questions that have been submitted, I want to think about like tools, techniques, because I know people always love it just when they get like a list of tools or techniques to go and Google and look at. So if someone was interested in, say, product management and or product ownership, what kind of keywords should they go away and Google?
So from a product management perspective, I think I would definitely recommend looking at things like the business model canvas. Yes. Right? Because every product fundamentally has a business model, and they may be very similar to other products your organization offers, but the business model tells you how the product actually makes money or generates the other outcomes that you may be looking for. So you need to have a firm understanding of that to be effective as a product manager. Other tools that you could use, and many of these will be familiar to people in the audience, right? Things like empathy maps are a useful way of thinking about what your customer needs and how they see things. I personally like the jobs to be done method, which is a very common in product management. And that involves looking at what your customers are trying to do in the sense of what is it they're trying to accomplish, right? The idea being that they're hiring your product to help them do something. And they don't care about your product as such. They care about the thing that it is supposed to help them do, right? Which could be entertain myself for an hour, or it could be, keep me from dying, right? At different extremes. But the point is that with that, understanding what your customer is trying to do allows you to then ask, well, how is our product helping them do that thing, right? And the more your product actually fills that need to get the job done, the more attracted they are likely to be to that product.
Yeah, jobs to be done is great, and I, like you, I found it creates almost a mental shift away from what are we doing, like what are we as a company doing, what are we producing, to how does the consumer realize value when they consume whatever it is we're doing, we're doing type of thing. And you start to think about I've spent a chunk of my career in insurance, right? And the thing about insurance is no one really wants it, right? No one really. I mean, it's important, right? Everyone needs it, but it's hard to get excited about. And you start to think about what do people really want out of it? They probably want certainty. They want to know that it's going to be there. And when you make that shift, you think about the way that you communicate that. It's very different. Even the tone of voice around how you would be communicating would probably change. So yeah, jobs to be done would be good. And James has just added business model canvas in the chat, which I think you mentioned the BMC, but a really great one. Just actually, just because, and this isn't I just happened to have been looking at this earlier. What are your take on journey maps?
Yeah, actually, that's a good one to bring up as well. Yeah, journey maps are really useful because they help you look at the customer experience as a whole, right? So the blind spot that they address is, for a lot of companies, it's like, okay, I look at my product, and I look at the moment you use it, and I say, well, okay, that's working well, right? But what happens when they have a problem? How did they become aware of your product in the first place? What's the onboarding experience like for them to start using it? And it forces you to look at the entire string of events across the lifetime of a customer and ask, where are the points where we are causing them misery and pain? And there usually are some, right? For instance, a recent engagement at Aligned Outcomes, we did the team went in and they mapped out the customer journey for one of our clients. They asked the client how many steps they figured were involved in the customer journey. Client said 20 odd, I think. They came back and said, well, actually, there's 109. Right? And many of these are causing frustration. So yes, you actually do need to, I think the journey maps are very effective at revealing that kind of problem. And that's something that you're not going to see in the other tools I mentioned, right?
Yeah, definitely, and not that I have no affiliation with. Again, I'm awful at pronouncing names. I've never met him, but Jim Kalbach, Mapping Experiences is the book I just held up, and I really like that. You can see I've even got tabs on it, right? Because this is one of those books that essentially says, yeah, people talk about mapping. There's no standard. Here's a bunch of examples. Use the ones that work with you, and here's how they architecturally fit together. So this is one of my go-to books for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I have it just over here.
Wow!
I agree with you.
We always have to have them within arm's reach. So Stuart asks a really fascinating, possibly controversial question, which are always the type I like, which is, does the evolution of products and POs mean we no longer need projects, project managers, etc., and can we just go straight to the product world?
Well, I certainly know a lot of people who are going to say yes to that question. I think we are going to see a huge evolution in that space. And, how I suspect at the end of it, we will still have people called project managers, but they may do something very different from what they do today. I remember seeing a report that PMI cited from Gartner where they said, the next 15, 20 years, about 80% of current project management activities will be automated. And I can see that, right? Because scheduling, task tracking, these are all things that lend themselves to significant automation. So what's left? What's left is business outcomes. And so I do think that we're going to see the project managers of the future looking much more like business analysts and being, internally focused on, I guess, internal products if you're building your stuff yourself, or internal change projects, right? Or process improvement. And, but the thing is that those people are seen as being able to produce the outcomes. I think the challenge for BAs is, I think we're going to less and less be able to have a business analyst take on a supporting role. If you want to remain needed in an organization, you're going to have to take on more of that responsibility for outcomes, that you have to be delivering something. And I think I said in one of the posts that I see the evolution towards product ownership as possibly one of the best things that could happen to business analysis, and that's what I'm getting at. I find that the big problem that BAs have in perception of the rest of the world is that we don't drive outcomes. We don't drive results. People see us as very process oriented, as focused on doing things right instead of figuring out what the business needs. And I think the growth of the product owner role has the potential to force a lot of people to shift into that more results-oriented mindset, right? Where you do business analysis to figure out how to get to an outcome that is necessary, right? Rather than the requirements for a piece of software.
Yeah, well, again, this is another real, for me as I'm listening, a real pivotal moment, because this is where it's all going to get a bit meta, right? Because I'm thinking, we're talking about, within organizations looking out at the opportunities and threats, and then, and within organizations looking internally at improvement opportunities. Well, then we could think about, okay, and for the business analysis profession, there's icebergs and there's opportunities, and it sounds like what you're saying there is there's an opportunity for us to have that impact for those people that are prepared to step up, for those people that have the appetite to change and roll with the waves. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, and to be honest, I've always thought that business analysts should be taking on more of that kind of thing, right? And during all the time I worked in the BA BOC, I was kind of trying to push things in that direction. Now I think they're going to get there on their own, no matter what what we want or what we try to do. I think the challenge is for people to kind of keep up with that, right? Same goes for business architects, by the way. I talk to a lot of business architects, and they seem to be focused on, arguing about what architecture is and definitions of terms and meta models. And, I'm not saying those things don't matter, but I'm saying that executives don't care about them.
Yeah.
And if business architecture wants to be relevant, it also has to do the same thing and focus on how do you get to a certain set of business outcomes, not what's the best way to model it.
Yeah, I completely agree on that, for analysis, for architecture, for everything. And I mean, just because we've been using hospital analogies a few times, the analogy I've used before and always resonates with me here is, if you've ever been unfortunate enough to have a relative who's been taken to sort of accident and emergency in a hospital, right? Like certainly here in the UK, there's lots of people and like there's lots of color in NHS hospitals. There seems to be lots of color coding to denote roles, and I don't care actually what any of those roles are. I just want the patient to be cured, right? That's the outcome that I care about. And don't talk to me about CCs of whatever. Talk to me in a language that makes sense to my goal type thing. And I mean, medical practitioners are fantastic. That was just a slightly flippant example, but you get that kind of thing.
Yeah. I don't know exactly what you're talking about. For the record, my wife is a nurse practitioner. I got in trouble one time when I did an interview and I referred to her as a nurse. She wanted to be absolutely clear about the difference. So, I'm doing this for her now. My wife is a nurse practitioner, not a nurse.
Fantastic. And I double down on my previous statement that, of course, medical practitioners are fantastic at communicating information. But someone's just asked for the title of the book again that I held up. Again, this is just one of many. It just happens to be that I was looking at it earlier. But it's mapping experiences there. So if you look that in your favorite bookshop, you'll be able to get that. I've just noticed there are loads of questions coming in the chat as well. So I'll look at the questions in the chat. One thing I should say is there was a previous webinar I did with Kent McDonald, which those of you that are interested in product ownership and product management should look up. And I actually see Kent is in the audience as well, which is fantastic. So let's just, where was that?
Yeah, and actually, Kent introduced me to a tool that is also very useful, not just for product management, but for business analysis or business architecture as well. And that is the purpose alignment model, which basically, you breaks down capabilities or features or whatever it has along two axes: mission criticality and market differentiation power, right? So how much do your customers care about, and how much does it make things unique versus how important is it to you running the business? And that is a very useful tool to get to the kind of prioritization we've been talking about. So I would definitely, recommend people look it up and take a read.
Definitely, definitely. And since Kent's in the audience, I'm multitasking, so I can't do this, Kent, but do us all a favor and paste a link to your blog, because it's fantastic. So in fact, you've just done that, as I said. Excellent. So a question from Paramita is, who should be responsible for owning the product roadmap?
So the product roadmap, that's going to depend on your situation. If you are working with a product that's out in the market, that is absolutely the product manager's responsibility to figure out what the roadmap needs to be, right? If they're working with a product owner, the product owner may take that down and break it up into chunks that the team can digest, but the product manager would own the roadmap. In internal stuff, that's the kind of thing that, I might do as a business architect, but the roadmap will probably be owned more by some executive in the business unit in the end, right? You can recommend things to them, but they will actually manage it. And similarly, honestly, a product manager, while they are responsible for the roadmap, they're going to have a lot of discussions with various people about what it looks like and when things are going to happen. So it's not like you get to say there and they say, this is my roadmap, you can't touch it.
Well, and you see, this is one of the interesting things. So I don't know if you've found this, Kevin, but I found the word roadmap's another one of those interesting words, because whenever I'm working with a client and they talk about roadmap, I ask that irritating analysis question, which is, when you say roadmap, what type of roadmap is that? Because and what I mean by that is it's almost a bit fractal. I've seen some people present something that they call a roadmap, and I'm like, that's a very granular micro level thing, and actually that might be what you or I or others might consider one part of a wider ranging roadmap. So you've got like different levels cascading potentially.
Yeah, and the trick there is fundamentally that a roadmap is a communication tool, right? So it's something that you're using to talk about your priorities and plans with some audience. So you may end up having multiple roadmaps for different audiences in many cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Which again, if you think about the analogy of a roadmap, well, you have roadmaps at different scales, right? So, and a roadmap is a communication and a navigation device in both of those senses. So it's no wonder that you have a big road atlas of the whole country or whatever, and also one for the city you're visiting, type of thing. So
yeah, I mean, the fundamental problem I think with roadmaps is that they got developed as a way to get away from project plans, because project plans were setting things out 2 years in advance, which is unrealistic. So we went to roadmaps to try and get everybody to agree to kind of a vaguer plan, but people are still looking for nailing down and absolute commitments. And so, I think there's that constant drift towards a Gantt chart, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to do quick fire now, Kevin. We'll just to get through as many of the remaining questions as we can just before we start to close. So I'm going to go through the chat, because there are a few in the chat as well. So Zahir says, Kevin, do you agree that a BA is still needed to help facilitate and deliver the PM's or PO's vision or the product vision, irrespective of whether this is through Agile or Waterfall?
So what I would say, I guess, is that as I said earlier, right, the product owner is a role that has a relationship with the team, and there's nothing in Scrum to say how that roadmap is, that plan, that backlog is built. If you're doing internal work, then you need to do business analysis work to actually figure out what needs to be done, right? How is the process changing? What are the capabilities that need to be built for that to actually feed into the team? So, the skill sets that a good BA has, both in terms of managing stakeholders, right, working with people to elicit requirements, but also in terms of process improvement, change management and other things, are still absolutely relevant in any future world, no matter what the job title ends up being.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about the skill. It's about as many have said before me, I'm sure it's about the analysis rather than the analyst type of thing. It's the, you know, the sort of the outcome. Claire adds an interesting comment that the BA has to be really close to the business vision and priorities in order to make the right priority calls, or perhaps work as the proxy product owner. And I think this comes back to what we were talking about earlier, where, you know, you've got to have that external, that strategic view, understand the organization's perspective. I mean, anything you'd add on to Claire's comment there?
No, I think that that's a great observation, right? Fundamentally, in order for the business to trust somebody with that product owner role and to enable them to do it properly, that means that the executives or managers or whoever feel that the person in that role fully understands the needs of the organization as a whole, right? And can actually prioritize what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Rather than who shouts the loudest, which is not a good way. A really interesting question from, I think it's Faye. He says, did the product owner role exist before Agile and specifically Scrum methodologies?
That's the earliest I've heard it mentioned. With that said, though, I do occasionally run into people from a business perspective who throw around the term product owner and fundamentally mean product manager as well, right? They mean the senior executive is responsible for something. And so I that usage may have emerged prior to its use in Scrum, for all I know.
Yeah. Fabrizio makes the observation that Scrum doesn't specifically talk about the role of a PM either, which is interesting. So that's what one to throw. And but that's another interesting thing. If anyone's tuned in, hasn't like looked at the Scrum guide, if you're doing Scrum and haven't looked at the Scrum guide, I mean, it's not a long document and it's online for free. It's kind of interesting to have a look at that.
And Fabrizio, it doesn't. That's because project managers don't exist in Scrum. The responsibilities that were traditionally project management are divvied up between some of them go to the product owner in terms of determining what the priorities are, right? Some of them go to the Scrum Master in terms of helping to manage it, help the team be more effective, and many of them go to the team. Right. The team determines how much work they can take on at any given moment. They determine how they estimate their own work. You know, they don't have a project manager who is responsible for pulling all of that together.
Yeah. Okay. Let's just fit in one more question before we move on to a slightly different angle. So I think it's Lizzle. Lizzle asks, how would a PO and product manager work together in terms of delegation of work or giving guidance and letting? So I guess it's like, would one delegate to the other, or would there be autonomy there?
Well, again, some of that is what is your personal working relationship like, right? But in a general sense, a product manager is going to be much more market focused. So they're going to be worrying about what the product does, how it operates, what the user experience is like, all those kind of questions. And they may be less concerned than the product owner about breaking all that down to take in a flow of work to the team that is, continuous, that team can handle, right? So likely I would expect that what would happen, that if you have both roles, is that at some stage as concepts get developed, they get migrated to the product owner to then work with the team to break that down into digestible chunks, right? So the product manager is going to say, we want this feature, and they may have a sense of how they want it to work. But if you're just doing product management and you have a product owner, you're probably going to move it over to them at some point in time as you get down into the weeds of exactly how it's going to work and how long it's going to take and what you have to modify, how you have to modify things and so forth.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so pivoting slightly, we've mentioned that product ownership and product management are a hot topic. They are clearly a hot topic, given the number of people registered for this webinar and the number of questions that are still coming in. And apologies to those of you whose questions we won't be able to get to. But why is it that product ownership and management are such a hot topic right now, Kevin? What do you think's triggered the interest in it, like at this point in history?
Well, I mean, two things, obviously. One is Agile, I think, fundamentally becoming a dominant paradigm in software development, right? Everybody likes, there's still waterfall out there. There's a lot of fake Agile, right? I know a lot of Agilists are traumatized by the current state of Agile, but at least in theory, almost everybody claims to be doing Agile now, right? And so with Scrum being the dominant form of Agile, well, that is part of it, right? A lot of people are just taking the roles that exist on Scrum teams and saying, well, that's a job description now.
Yeah.
Without giving it a lot of thought. I think the other thing that's driving product management to be a hot topic is the technology industry, right? Product management has always been a thing with software companies, and it didn't originate there. There have been product managers in consumer product goods and so forth for decades. I mean, I think the first known use of the term was in 1936 or something.
Wow.
But with the rapid growth of software companies, and particularly startups, the product management role has become, this be all end all of what you need in order to be successful in that environment, right? The focus on product is kind of relentless in that startup space, and I think that's driven a lot of the prominence of the product manager position.
Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, just in my own experience, I know that there are some organizations that look at the agility, and I'm talking like organizational business agility now, but the organizational level agility that startups are perceived to have, that are in established legacy organizations, and are saying, well, hang on a minute, what are they doing that we're not? So maybe there's a bit of that happening as well.
Yeah, I can tell you from my experience in startups, particularly the ones that have been successful, that what they are doing is desperately running around trying to keep the organization from collapsing under its own weight as they grow beyond their ability to typically manage it. Right? It's
trying to make sure that they can clear payroll each month, right? I mean, that's the financial reality.
Sometimes it's that, but even if it's not that, right? If they're wildly successful, they're running around trying to staff everything.
Yeah.
So that's what they're actually doing. In practice, in terms of what businesses could learn from, it would be that how do we focus much more on the customer experience? And I think the challenge that a lot of existing businesses have is, it's not like they're building it from scratch. They don't have the luxury of throwing out all of their existing infrastructure, and that makes it much harder to change everything on the fly than it is for a startup that doesn't have that.
Yeah.
Right? They don't have anything that they have to replace. And these days there are a lot of infrastructure providers who will give you a lot of what you need at a relatively low cost, like AWS. A lot of the big tech providers you can get the back end infrastructure as soon as you need it. You don't have to go out and buy a data farm for yourself or something.
Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. Well, so I mean, a tricky question, Kevin, because there's so much we've discussed, and I mean, we could carry on for the rest of eternity probably for talking about this topic. But if there was one biggest takeaway, if there was one thing that you think you'd really want people who are tuned in to take that thing or those couple of things away from the session today, what would that biggest takeaway be?
I think the one thing I would say is that, as I mentioned before, I think the rise of product ownership and the responsibilities around it are a big opportunity for business analysts who are ready and willing to step up to that greater level of responsibility. The reality is that as a BA, you have a ton of the skills that are needed to succeed in product management or product ownership, right? Those are both, and business architecture. These are all roles that act as a kind of a glue to the organization, for lack of a better term, right? We're all cross-functional people who, kind of help teams at multiple parts of the organization work together more effectively to achieve business outcomes. And the way we do that is a little different, but the fundamental role, the fundamentals, core soft skills, as it were, are pretty common. So there is a huge opportunity for BAs to move into these kind of things. And Adrian, one last thing I'll probably get in trouble if I forget to mention is I do have a book coming out this summer, co-authored with Sally Godwin and Philip Hendricks on digital product management. So that's coming from BCS Publishing. You'll hear more about it as we get closer to publication date. But I wanted to make sure that I didn't get to mention it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and do check that out from BCS Publishing, and and keep an eye, for when that comes out. So, so how can people stay in touch with you? Because I'm sure people will want to follow you. They'll want to know when your book comes out. They'll want to see the other work that you do. How can people connect?
Well, the best way at this point in time is probably to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to take connections from people. I'm also, or on Twitter at BA Kevin. In terms of blogging and article publishing, there'll probably be more coming from me in a little while, but you'll see it on those two platforms. As Aligned Outcomes, the startup I'm working with now, ramps up our web presence. We're kind of getting our act together on that front, and so I expect I'll be able to be talking more about this and other related topics in the near future.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, and please do, for those of you tuned in live, please do. I've literally just put the Kevin's LinkedIn address in the chat. It's kind of weird, isn't it? Because if we were doing this as a real world event, there'd probably be a round of applause about now. So I always think that it's like a virtual round of applause is connecting with the speaker if you've really found what they've had to say interesting and inspirational, as I'm sure all of us have with you today, Kevin. So thank you very much, Kevin, for taking the time to have a chat. To those of you that are still tuned in, don't log off just yet, because I have a couple of other things that you will, I'm sure, be interested in, some free things. Free is always a good price. The first is, if you've ever had tricky stakeholders and you're interested in creating deeper connections with stakeholders, I'm holding a webinar on the 8th of February at 10 a.m. UK time with Dr. Liz Calder and Kathy Burkich on that topic. You will find a registration link there for free. If you are in a time zone where that doesn't work for you, feel free to register, and as long as you click the opt-in button, you'll get a link to the recording sent to you. Then on the 24th of February, I'm going to be talking with Agnesia Lozorecki about avoiding digital exclusion, and this is a really interesting topic. It's one I'm really intrigued about, because you think about, well, COVID has often meant that a lot of services and products have moved online, but does that mean that we're having perhaps sometimes impacts on folks who cannot, or for one reason or another can't interact online? And that's a topic that's really important that we have in our heads, about making sure everything is inclusive for everyone. So you will also get an email after this session with a link to the recording, and also a link to a magazine called BA Digest, which is a free 50-plus page PDF. So do take a look at that as well. But that is all for this evening. So wherever you are in the world, thank you for tuning in. Thanks again, Kevin. Hopefully one day we'll be able to be in the same city again. Hopefully. I miss being able to travel, but that would be nice. So thanks, Kevin. Stay safe, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Adrian. It's been a pleasure.
Take care. Thanks, everyone. Bye.